there. Just showing you the title of tonight. I'm going to talk about engagement and how to handle disengagement in your training. I think we're going to do this for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll have some time to answer questions. Okay, so it's 2 minutes past. We're getting started. This will be available to watch later on as well. We're going to share it on our Facebook page so that you can come back and watch the beginning if you arrived a bit after that I've started. So, hello and welcome. My name is Elsa Blomster. I'm obviously the one on the left here, together with my colleague Lena Gunnarsson. We've written the book Retrieving for All Occasions, Foundations for Excellence in Gun Dog Training together. We published it in Swedish in 2012, and then a couple of years later, we translated it to English. And now we're trying to show how we think, how we want to do our training in a fun and very interesting and challenging way. And we've received a lot of questions, so therefore we want to spread the word even further. And that's why we're doing this free webinar series. I've been working as a part-time instructor since 2010. I've been mostly focusing on gun dog training, especially since the book was published. But I've also been giving classes on everyday life training, obedience, rally obedience, tracking, and things like that. So for tonight, I'm going to have a short agenda. I'm going to start with talking about what engagement is and how that is the foundation for all training. And then I think that we need to define what engagement and disengagement look like so that we know what we're talking about. Then I'm going to talk about how we start with building engagement, because that's of course where we start. We start with the behavior that we want, and then we look into how we should handle disengagement if that problem arises. So then I'm going to talk about how we analyze disengagement, how we handle it, and then I'm going to answer questions. So please use the Zoom function for sending me questions, and I will get back to them as soon as possible. So engagement, the foundation of all training. And we don't want to start the training until we're in the training bubble together with your dog. And that is something that we talk quite a lot about on our classes. But before setting up this webinar, I asked the members of our Facebook group, Retrieving for All Occasions chatter group, what they wanted me to talk about. And I gave some options about handling. Oh, I get some messages here that I'm breaking up a lot, just hearing every fourth or fifth word. I'm just wondering if we're having the same problem on our Facebook page or if it works better there. Just let me check with my technicians who are helping me out here. Let's see if but is the Zoom audio fine? Yeah, I'm hearing that it works fine on Zoom. Okay, so I think what you might need to do if you're experiencing trouble, if you're not on Zoom, that if you're on Facebook, you might have to click pause and then come back and watch a bit later. And I hear that from a lot of you that the sound is fine. So I'm going to go ahead anyway, and then I recommend you to go back and watch the recording afterwards, and then you'll probably hear the sound better. So I asked in the chatter group what they wanted me to talk about. I gave them options like delivery to hand, casting, stop whistle, and things that we usually get questions about. But what sailed to the top of the list was engagement and how to handle disengagement. So I was a bit surprised at first, but then I realized that it's not that strange that that's right to the top, because if we don't have that, we can't do anything. We have to have it first before we can start any training. So we need to build that engagement, and then we could go on to do the more fun stuff as we usually tend to see it. If we don't do that, we might run into even more problems later on. But sometimes we're in luck and everything works. We have a dog that doesn't have a problem with the engagement, but we might run into problems later on anyway. And that way, you might also benefit from the webinar tonight, because you probably get some tips on what to do if that problems arise later on. You might not also have the problems when you're at home, but they might arise when you go to a new environment, because the foundation for your engagement with the dog isn't as strong there as it is at home where you usually train. So I think that you'll find it interesting tonight. I'll send you some questions afterwards and see if I can get some feedback on what to improve for next time. But if we start with engagement, what does it look like? And I want to just give you a short thing to remember, and that is the balance between engagement and excitement, and especially overexcitement, because that's not what we want. We want the dog to be engaged. We want the dog to look at us or to focus on the task at hand with expectation, but not so much expectation that it starts to whine, make noise, bark, or anything like that, especially not in gun dog training, where we want the dog to be quiet and focused. We usually also want the dog to have a happy body language, or we want the dog to have a happy body language with, wagging tails, ears forward, and being, engaged in the work ahead. If we then, look at what that might look like, and when we say something to the dog or when it performs the behaviors, it can be very clear that if the dog can't respond as quickly to a cue in this new environment as it does at home, for example, it might be a too difficult situation for the dog, and we don't get the engagement that we want. So another thing that we're looking for to see if the dog is engaged is that it is able to quickly respond to our cues. And then the disengagement, of course, that might be easier to see when that happens. But I want to show you both sides, because we really want to focus more on getting getting the engagement than getting stuck on the disengagement. But the disengagement might be the dog sniffing around, staring towards the horizon, or looking at everything that happens around it. It might be that it leaves the handler or the dummy or the area where it's supposed to work and go away to check something else out. Or it might be that it goes away to pee, or sort of just checks out and do something else. And it's also that we might define disengagement quite differently than the dog does, because the dog is obviously very engaged in something, just not what we want it to be engaged in. So I think it's quite important that we know what we're talking about, so that the dog isn't doing this to show off or to make us mad. It's just that the situation probably got too difficult for it, or that something else was more interesting. But I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to start with, as I said before, how we build that engagement. We start with teaching the dog that it pays off to focus on the handler. So that way it will be able to get everything that it wants through the handler. If you know that your dog likes to go greet other people, you might, for example, use that as a reward. When the dog looks at you, you could let it go ahead and go say hi to its favorite person, for example, so that everything fun happens through the handler. We also reward good behaviors that we like. And that we start with doing that all the way from when we get the puppy home. That's also about building this engagement and teaching the dog that it pays to focus on me. Because if the dog focuses on me, I reward that good behavior, the behavior that I like, I get more of that behavior. So the dog looks even more at me and I could reward it more. We also do quite a lot of training to teach the dog to be able to cope with different environments. So what you usually do when you come to a new place, probably because that is what I do and a lot of friends to me do is that you go around, you say hi to other participants. Before Corona, we shook hands. Now we probably just wave to each other. But you find a toilet, you grab a cup of coffee, and so on. You get comfortable in the situation. Then you take the dog out of the car and you start training. Gets thrown into the training situation and doesn't really know what to do or what's expected of it. So then it's quite difficult for the dog to be as engaged in us and in the training as it is at home. So instead it goes off, starts to sniff and do other things. So therefore, we have a couple of exercises that we use to get the dog used to the environment. We come to our training ground or with the place that we're going to train a bit in advance, take the dog out of the car and let it get used to the area by sniffing around, go pee, and yeah, do all the doggy stuff. And then we start with either one of these exercises. There's links here. I'm going to give you these show notes. I'm going to email them to everyone that's registered on Zoom. I'm going to put them on our webpage and on our Facebook page, so you will get all of this. But there's 2 video links here. One is to an exercise that we call the checking in exercise. And that is an exercise that we usually start all our classes with. We reward the dog for all good behaviors. Just click and treat for looking at us, for moving towards us, for having a loose leash and things like that, for following us when we move along, and so on. If the dog finds this really, really difficult, we might need to start with clicking just when the dog raises its head from the ground. Even though it might not be to look at us, it might just be because it's heading to the next interesting spot to sniff at. But if we click when it raises its head and put the treat in front of its nose, we hopefully can interrupt it and it can realize, oh, I can get a treat. And then it will start to look at you. Or maybe you have to do that a couple of times before the dog starts to look at you and starts to work together with you and get into the training bubble. So we reward every good behavior until we feel that the dog is engaged in the training and we're in our training bubble together. The other exercise that we like to use is the settling in exercise. There's a big shout out to Helen Phillips. Thank her a lot for that exercise. It's actually a very sort of controlled way to get the dog used to the environment. We put up 2 markers, perhaps 2 cones or something like that, sort of 5 meters apart. We put on a flat collar and a leash on the dog, and then we just walk around these cones. We let the dog sniff the ground, we let the dog check everything out, and we just keep walking around these cones. After a while, the dog will get bored or will get done with sniffing and start to come closer to us, start looking at us, and start to say, oh, what's happening? Shouldn't we be doing something? And then when this dog starts to walk by our side and look a bit at us, we continue to walk a bit more until the dog is walking calmly, nicely by our side. And then we could start to give it a treat calmly, nicely, just sneaking a treat down to it. So the dog continues to walk by our side, continues to follow us. If the dog wants to go off and sniff again, we let it. We just keep walking around the cones until the dog is done and ready for training. When the dog can take the treat and continue to walk by our side and take the treat and continue to walk by our side, then we know that the dog is ready, and then we could start to do what we actually wanted to do in our training session. So building engagement is all about getting into that training bubble. But then comes the difficult part. How do we handle disengagement? And what do we do when it happens, and how do we make sure that it doesn't happen again? Well, when it happens, we want to interrupt the dog somehow without intimidating it, but so it doesn't self-reward, because we don't want the dog to be just off on its own and thinking that, oh, it's just actually great fun to be on my own here. We want it to be more rewarding to be with us. So that way, I might, for example, need to shorten the leash or hold the dog by the collar, or walk away from those very interesting sights and sounds, so that the dog can be able to focus on me again and I can reward it more. Then I analyze why that happened and make a plan. And there's a lot of things that could be the reason to us why it happens. It could be that the dog is not comfortable in the situation, and that is we often see then the dog is sniffing a lot. It could be staring at the other dogs. It might not be interested in taking its rewards and so on. So the obvious thing that we start with there is to make the situation easier, as I said, move away from other dogs. I might also actually just do very easy stuff in this class setting, which is often the difficult situation. And then I do more difficult things when I get back home. So to make it easier for the dog. It might also be that there's something more interesting elsewhere, or the task is not motivating enough. Then we usually look into our reward quality. We really have to find something that the dog really, really wants to work for. It could be treats, it could be toys, it could be that we give the dog a cue that is now you're allowed to go sniff, let it sniff for a while, and then bring it back into the training and do some short exercises, and then you could let it go sniff again. So you have to find something that makes it worthwhile for the dog to participate in the training. It might be too difficult for the dog. I might have been setting my criteria way too high. So then I of course need to lower my criteria a bit. It might also be that the dog is actually getting tired. I have been training for too long. And then I might need to take a break. It's also could be that some dogs actually aren't by nature very energetic. So then you really have to be careful on how you do your training. So you just do very short sessions, very few repetitions when the dog is alert, and use that energy well. For example, you could try to see when during the day your dog is at most alert. Is it before dinner? Is it just when you get home from work? And so on. And when all these other options have been analyzed, you might need to consider that the dog actually isn't feeling very well. So you might need to go to the vet or the dog physio to check it out. We've had quite a few dogs that will actually have recommended to do that, and the vet have found different things. And when that has been sorted, the dog has been well as new and really engaged in the training and really want to do stuff and motivated for its rewards and so on. So that might also be a reason to why the dog isn't as engaged as we would expect it to be. And that is also something to keep in mind if it changes suddenly. If the dog usually is very engaged and then all of a sudden it's not, and then you might start to suspect that something is wrong. And then before heading over to the questions, I just want to share with you some great tools that we look to when we want to make a change and to increase the engagement or to solve problems in our training. We start with looking at reward frequency, and that is how often we reward the dog. Uh, does the dog get enough information on what we want it to do? Because every reward is information to the dog that that was the right thing, that is what we want you to do. And then when we reward that, we will get more of that behavior. Then we look at reward quality. Do you have good enough rewards? Is it worthwhile for the dog to work for that reward? And then, of course, we have to look at it from the dog's point of view. Is what we might consider a good reward might not be what the dog considers a good reward. For example, the dog would probably consider chasing cats or eating cat poo or whatever very good rewards. We might not want to use them, so perhaps then we could do the next best thing for the dog, which might be sausage or cheese or a very, very fluffy toy to chase. So of course we have to to find rewards that the dog likes and that we find acceptable. And then the third tool is criteria. What do we want the dog to do? Is it too high, too difficult for the situation, or is it actually manageable for the dog to do that? Has it been able to do it at that level before? Well, then we might start looking at other things, like if there's too difficult distractions around, and make the distractions easier. So 3 great tools to go back to: reward frequency, reward quality, and criteria. So with that said, and the background and how we in general analyze and handle disengagement, I'm going to head over to 2 questions that we've received beforehand, and then I see that there's another question in the chat as well that I'm going to come back to. So we have a question on if the dog leaves a mark to go check out an enticing smell, how do we handle that? Well, if I think that the dog knows what to do, that is usually does it right, usually goes out, pick the mark and come back, then I will just recall the dog or calmly go get the dog, so it can't self-reward, and then I will try again, just try the same thing. If it happens a lot, I might need to set up training sessions with enticing smells on the ground at a short distance as a distraction, and then put the dummy down just close to me, ask the dog to pick it, ignoring that enticing smell, and reward it a lot for ignoring that smell. And then I can gradually increase the distance again. And then we had a question about the dog who's just sniffing the ground, not looking at me at all. Well, then I would go back to a few of those things that I talked about before. Why does the dog do that? Is it because it's not comfortable in the situation? Is it because it's too difficult? Or is it because I haven't given in enough information on what I wanted to do? So I would probably here start with increasing the reward quality, lowering my criteria, and rewarding the dog for just lifting its head off the ground. To make that a bit easier, I might shorten the leash and just hold the dog by its collar for a while until it sort of loses the tension in the collar. So I could click and reward a couple of times, so the dog realizes that there is rewards to be had if it focuses on me. But the sniffing can be a bit tricky to actually see why. So you have to also see, how does the dog respond to when you do that? If it's not interested in taking the rewards, well, then I have to increase the reward quality. If I can't find a good enough reward, then I might have to think about other things. Has the dog just been eaten so it's not hungry, or is it just that it's a very, very difficult situation? Should I move even further away? Should I be on a training ground where the smells aren't as interesting? Perhaps if I go indoors, does it work there? So the sniffing thing, you actually have to look a lot on that specific situation and see how the dog responds to what you're trying to do. I'm going to head over to a few questions here, and we have a question from Heather. When the initial engagement exercise ends, that is, when you stop walking around the cones, the ground and the circumstances can change, and this can cause you to need to start again. What exercise can build duration in engagement? Yes, that is a really good question. With the settling in exercise, if the dog loses engagement, and I might need to reset, I might need to go back to walking around my cones again. And then I need to think about not having a too long training session so the dog doesn't have time to lose interest. But increasing the duration in the engagement, I start with doing several simple exercises after each other. So with a puppy, that might be just touching my hand, reward, touching my hand, reward, 2 steps of heel work, reward, and then a short break. And then I gradually increase so that we have some more steps of heel work. I might have the dog pick up a retrieve, bring it to me, and then we take a break before the dog disengages. So I gradually increase it by adding more and more exercises after each other. And I'm also having a very clear cue on uh, telling the dog that now you can go sniff. Now the training is over, so that it knows that now it can relax and do all that doggy stuff that it wants to do. I hope that answered your question, Heather. Otherwise, just ask more questions, and I'll try to be even more specific in my answers. So we have a question from Sarah. I struggle to find rewards of a high enough value to my dog to compete with exciting things in the environment. He is not really into food. Any suggestions? Yes, can be very challenging because food is a very easy reward to use. But if that doesn't work, you could, of course, start with the obvious things. You try to use, we'll start to do the training when the dog is hungry, so that it will be more interested in the food. Have several different food rewards, but also look into other rewards. What can be interesting for the dog? Is it to chase a toy? Is it to go swim? To be allowed to sniff the ground? To be allowed to do an exercise that it really wants. If the dog is really good at delivery to hand, I know that I will get stuff back, and the dog loves chasing its tennis ball. I could use that as a reward, throwing the ball away and letting the dog chase after it, for example, as a reward for heel work or for responding well to the stop whistle. I would also suggest that you really look and study your dog to see what does it enjoy doing, and try to use that as a controlled reward. Perhaps if the dog really loves to run, you could put a cue on that and let the dog run as a reward as well. You could also build uh, the interest in rewards for if the dog loves to play tug. You could tug, and then you give it a treat, and then oh, sorry, that way around. You give it a treat and then you tug. You give it a treat and then you tug, and that way you will actually increase the value of the treat. So you could build your toolbox of rewards that the dog likes by like any behavior actually, by rewarding that behavior with something that the dog likes more. What you usually need to do as well is to vary your rewards, because the dog will get tired if you reward with the same thing over and over again. The dog will get tired and disengaged due to that. So if you have a dog that is a bit difficult to reward, you yourself have to be even more clever and figure out different rewards so the dog doesn't know what to expect and what is coming, so that you don't always reward with that tennis ball or always reward with kibble. I hope that was the answer to your question, Sarah. We're going to move on and see if we have a few more questions here. Let me see. Any suggestions for dogs that become overexcited and over enthusiastic whilst working? For example, a radio obedience dog that barks in excitement while carrying out an exercise perfectly. Yes, overexcitement can be really tricky. So things that I would focus on is to get the dog in a more focused frame of mind before starting the training. For some dogs, that might be that it has a need to just run a bit before you start training, or you could do some nose exercises. For example, you could let it search for some treats on the ground, or you could hide a tennis ball that you let it hunt for and find, so that it gets out, so it gets to blow off some steam before focusing on what you want it to focus on. If it then starts to bark in an exercise, I would quit that exercise and try to get the dog calm and focused again, and then start over. Using an external reward, for example, having a food in a bowl or showing the dog that you put its reward down, might get it to focus. It says, oh, my reward is over there. Okay, tell me what you to do, what you want me to do. So it sort of gets quiet because it's really focusing on the reward. For some dogs, that might have the completely opposite effect, actually getting the dog too excited just because it knows that the reward is there. So for those dogs, I obviously wouldn't use that solution. But those are a few things that you could try, actually giving the dog something else to focus on. Exercise. Okay, oh, time is running, so let's see if I have time for a few more questions before we move on. A question from Philly. I mostly had to train my puppy in public spaces because my backyard is tiny. It was challenging even when I tried to find quiet places because of all the new sniffs. Any tips on helping build a focused training space for a young dog? Here, I think the settling in exercise is great because when you let the dog become finished with its sniffing, and then it sort of gets ready for the training, then you could stay in that training ground because then there's no more interesting smells for the dog to check out because you let the dog become finished with the smells before you start the training. Uh, and then, of course, the ideas that I mentioned before, having really great rewards and rewarding the dogs very often, high reward frequency, and thinking about your criteria. And what you also could do with a young dog, you probably don't need for a puppy, you probably don't need that much space. So when the dog is done with sniffing, when you've been walking around the cones, don't walk too far away from the cones. Stay in that area between the cones and do the training there when there's not that much interesting smells. Okay, we're doing a final question before we move on. Let's see. Thinking about upping the value of the reinforcer to tug or balls, etc. Mainly one would also up the excitement. How to reconcile this to the first point you made about not having an overexcited dog and maintaining a balance? I find this difficult. Yes, that can be really, really difficult and challenging. So that way I would probably use I use the tag or the balls a few times, but then I mostly try to use calmer rewards. So for example, I might give 3 or 4 food rewards, and then I tug, and then I do some food rewards, and then I can give a tennis ball, and then I might take short break. What I think is very important there is that if I feel that the dog is starting to get too excited, I will I would take a break, let the dog settle down, perhaps throw some treats on the ground for the dog to sniff and find, and then become more calm again. And when it's focused and has calmed down, then I could start the training over again. Okay, so I think that was the last question for tonight. I could talk about this forever, and I see there's a few more questions coming in, but unfortunately we don't have time for them now. We're going to move on to just a short summary and some tips on what you um, could do later on and things that we could help you with more. So we just have a short news section. I don't know if you've seen it, but we've just released a new study guide based on the book. We had a study guide before, part 1, and now we have part 2, an intermediate level. If you want to move on to more advanced exercises and you want to have some structure and training ideas. You could do it on your own, or you could do it together with your training group and a couple of friends and set it up together. We've also just released quite a few new online courses, and as with all our online courses, you could choose if you want to have them with or without feedback. We have a new course on stop whistle, on heel work, on holding an area, a course on advanced casting, which is very exciting, and controlling the dog at a distance. And we also offer early bird prices for those courses. So you will get the 30% discount to the 15 first participants who register for those courses. So go to our website to check those out: the stop whistle, heel work, holding an area, and advanced casting. Then we also have some early Christmas gifts. The book, Retrieving for All Occasions, is on a 50% discount until January 31st. And you can find links on where to buy it on our website, Retrieving for All Occasions, and then you just click book and you'll find it. We sell it on Dogwise in the US and in YPD Books in the UK. They offer worldwide shipping. It is also available on Amazon. I don't know if the 50% discount is available there. So please use the links on our website and you'll find the links to our retailers who offer the discount. And then I'd also like to share with you our Christmas or Advent calendar. So every day until Christmas, which we here in Sweden celebrate on December 24th. So the last gift will be on December 24th. You can make a wish and win very nice gifts in our Advent calendar. It's our online courses, books, and study guides, and so on. And finally, I just want to wish you all very much good luck with your training. I hope you've gotten some new insights and new ideas from the webinar here today. And if you have questions or you need more help, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'd be happy to offer you private sessions online, and you will also be given a 20% discount on those sessions if you purchase them before December 31st, and then you could schedule them anytime during 2020 or 2021, so you don't have to schedule them before December 31st. So thank you very much for today, and good luck with your training. I hope you enjoyed the webinar here today, and hopefully we'll be able to put on some more webinars later on.